Hello, and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul-led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time it is that you're listening to this. I'm curious, when is your favorite time to listen to the podcast? Do you listen on your dog walk, or while you're on the road, or maybe doing stuff around the house? I usually listen to podcasts while I'm doing things around the house, and so I often wonder how you guys like to listen or watch. Send me a message on Instagram and let me know where you're tuning in from. Well, whatever it is you're doing while listening to the podcast, apart from driving, I know that today's guest, Wendy Welpton, is going to inspire you to think about how you can incorporate new ways of moving while you're doing it. Wendy founded Reclaim Movement after a running injury at the age of 40 turned into 4 years of chronic pain. In her search for answers and to reclaim her own movement again, she discovered natural movement. Natural movement, if you're not familiar with it, is the philosophy of training real-life practical movements to be able to keep using them as we age. It also involves strengthening and mobilizing whole body movement patterns that are often underused in today's modern world. When Wendy started using natural movement in her own life, it made her realize she had found a way to move for life. Wendy's aim now is to help you to embrace a movement-rich life at any age to improve mobility, strength, and confidence to keep moving well and doing the things that you love for as long as you want. I first came across Wendy's work through her Instagram Reels, where she shares really simple ways to incorporate a variety of movements into the things that we're already doing. Wendy's philosophy is that it's not about adding more things to your to-do list, but instead doing what you're already doing more intentionally, whether that's practicing balancing on one foot in order to put your shoes on, or sitting on the floor to fold laundry, or even squatting to clean your dog's paws after a muddy walk. In our conversation today, Wendy and I talk about really simple ways that you can start modifying and improving the quality of your movements right now, regardless of your mobility level. We also talk about how to turn your everyday routines with your dog, including your daily walk, into joyful opportunities to support strength and mobility, along with your dogs, so that you two can have many years of health, happiness, and fun together. And as we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to let you know that this episode is supported by Aspirationary, which, in full transparency, is another project of mine where we create books, notebooks, and stationery to help you become all you aspire to be. You can check out our shadow work and moon magic journals and workbooks, as well as our popular My First Period tracker for young girls and tweens on Instagram at Aspirationary. That's spelled ASPIRATIONERY. Okay, on that note, let's get moving. Hi, Wendy. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Mystic Dog Mama podcast. I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting.
Oh, I think this is going to be a lot of fun today because you just do such amazing work. And I was really excited to reach out to you and say, okay, so I know that you're doing this with humans and kind of focusing on the humans, but how about humans who walk dogs? How do we bring this conversation to the fore? So we're going to dive into all things movement and humans and dogs today, which will be fun.
Great.
I'd love you to let the audience know how I first came across you is with your fantastic Instagram reels with your company Reclaim Movement. And they're so much fun. And I loved the notion of reclaiming movement, of recognizing that movement is what we are here to do. But in our kind of modern sedentary world, we've either gotten away from it or we relegate movement to like exercise, to going to the gym. It is in a specific place, time, and purpose in our lives. And what you're talking about with Reclaim Movement is really focusing on movement throughout our whole entire day to support us as we age and move forward. And I think it's such an important conversation to be having.
Absolutely. And one that I have only fully embraced myself in the last 10 years. I'm about to turn 50. So because prior to that I was never inactive, but I've always been an active person. I've always loved walking, and I used to be a bit of a gym bunny, going to the gym, not kind of thinking about what it did to my body. And then something unfortunately for me changed where I got into running, loved running. I think particularly the connection with the outdoors and nature, having been a gym bunny and needing to be outside and getting that blue sky and the green around me. So my addiction to that was probably partly the movement, partly the outside. What I didn't realize was that I was running on an unstable structure, but it seemed fine. I had a few niggles like everyone does, but then when you run, you put a lot of impact, a lot of force through your body. So if you are a bit misaligned, things can happen. And for me, that was at the age of 40. I then went on a run, and I talk about it as my injury, but I didn't particularly get injured. I just woke up that night after one beautiful run, which I remember well, and I couldn't walk. I was in so much pain, and I struggled to do many basic things for quite a long time. I still don't know what that actually was, whether it was a slip disc or whatever, but the pain was excruciating, and it really was something that I just didn't expect. Long story short, that then led to 4 years of chronic pain. And 3 months in, I remember saying to that guy that I had found to help me, how long do you think this is going to be? Because, it's been quite a while already. I'm still in a lot of pain. Surely it can't last that long. And he did a bit like you're doing now, nodded and smiled. No answer, because we can never answer that question. And for me, it was 4 years until I was pretty much pain-free. So I went through some very dark times where I suddenly questioned not just exercise, but movement. I could hardly move. I had three. I just added an extra one. I had three young boys who were very active and wanted me to be active with them. And I had to often say no, because I knew it would cause flare-ups and pain. And just sitting still became uncomfortable. I couldn't get my body comfortable, and I was on painkillers, and I was just in a dark place. So your introduction is really relevant, because a lot of us really take our basic movement for granted. And I suddenly was upset that I had, because I couldn't believe that this was going to be me. I refused to believe that that 40-year-old me would be like that forever. But I had the fear that I would, because I got so little information about what was wrong with me. And so through that process of trying to find help, not getting very much, going through different people to help me, physical therapists and so on, I found something called natural movement, as you talked about in your intro, which I had never heard of. It's bigger in America than it is here where I am in the UK. And when I started to deep dive and read and listen, I started to realize this is what had gone wrong. This is what had led me to dysfunction and to then have pain. And so it also was very similar to some of the rehab movements I was doing. And I thought, what is it about this? And so basically, natural movement is about the skills that we are born with to move, that we needed when we were early man, hunter-gatherers, to survive. But as you said, in the modern world, we just don't need anymore. So when do you crawl unless you're a baby? And yet it's a really beneficial thing for you to do. Do we even need to get lower than chair height? Not a lot. Occasionally, we can just sort of bend down through our backs to get there, but we don't really need to. We don't need to perform a deep squat anymore, for example, that basic squat that so many people in the East still do. And yet in the West, we've decided we can't do it because we don't need it, because we have chairs to sit on. So lots of things like that all added up to me realizing this is the way I need to move for my future. Luckily for me, I got out of pain. A lot of people really struggle to get there, but there were several things that were different to the life I had before that I realized I needed to keep doing. And that's the kind of thing that you're talking about that I put on my Instagram all the time, to just drop in snippets of important, healthy movement patterns and regularity of movement, which we'll go on to talk about, that particularly if you've got a dog, is great because you already are probably an active person because you're having to walk the dog, which is great, but there's actually so much more that you can do. So yeah, so basically my path is from pain to learning and an enlightenment, awareness. We don't know until we know. And so my mission now is to try and make people really understand and embrace the importance of just moving and moving well. Because we all know we should exercise, but we don't all know how we need to move.
Oh, I think that's beautiful and perfect because I think, for me as well, I was in a pretty serious car accident when I was 19
Okay.
and ended up injuring my back, which has plagued me since in various ways. And I used to do physical therapy, and it limited the types of exercises that I can do. Like running is painful. It can be
Mm.
painful because you're jarring everything. But I sort of felt lost myself with, how am I ever going to deal with this pain, because it
Mm.
will flare up, and it still does flare up. But I've noticed that the things that are most helpful for me are exactly those types of, before I came across you and had that term, they are more the natural movements. They are getting into a deep squat, for example, to help release the lower back, those sorts of things that have been the most helpful. But I always looked at it from, say, like a yoga perspective. So I do a yoga video for back pain or whatever. And those things are great. But again, like I was saying when I first started, that I was just doing those movements at those times when I was doing the yoga video. I wasn't consciously embedding that kind of movement throughout my entire day until the pain would start. And then I'd be like, oh, I should, I'll go and try to squat it out, kind of thing. And what I love
Yeah.
about what you show in your videos is how you can just, it's a paradigm shift, really. It's a massive reframe for taking what you're doing in your normal everyday life and doing it slightly differently, or bringing that sense of awareness to not just the task, but what is your body doing and how are you moving whilst doing that task. And I think that's a huge, for me anyways, it was just like a huge mind-blowing
Mm.
experience of like, oh my gosh, I can do this easily without adding another to-do thing to my list.
Exactly. And that is so important. If I've ever had anything before where I needed to go and have rehab and they gave me the list of do these 6 exercises through, it's, okay, yes, I promise I did them. It's impossible to remember, but also to motivate yourself. All of that is really, really difficult. So we've got to make it easy for ourselves to move easily. And the only way you can do that is by incorporating those movements into the things you do in the day anyway. So I talk about squatting to get my washing out of my front loading washer. So rather than thinking, oh, I could do this way, I will link that so that I always do it. So there's something in me that my muscle memory almost, okay, you should be squatting now, down you go. And then when I do, as I post regularly, when I fold washing, I take it to a room with a clean floor and I sit down on the floor because I'm carrying it. And I know that's good for me. I'm getting down to the floor. I know that's good for me. I'm then moving in a whole variety of ways that I've learned. I know that's good for me. And then I'm getting up and I know that's good for me. And actually, that whole it's good for me thing means that when you're doing the most boring of chores, I've got 3 teenagers and a husband, there's a lot of boxer shorts. then you at least are saying, no, this is good. This is beneficial to me. And I mind the fact I have to do it regularly less. So it's a reframe in both ways. It makes sort of living a little bit better, but also you stand up and you feel, yeah, I've moved my hips. I'm more comfortable on the ground than I was perhaps before I started. I'm getting some sort of strength work in and so on. So yeah, it's got to be easy. We've got to make things easy on ourselves, but at the same time, we have to embrace the fact that we do need to move more often. We do need to incorporate that sort of small bouts of movement breaks regularly and often, because it's the sedentarism, the sitting for long periods, that's really causing us issues. So often people will say, well, I've done my half an hour of gym work 3 times a week or whatever, to meet sort of guidelines. But if, like you were saying, if you're not aware of how you move the rest of the time, you can still get yourself into some real trouble, which was me.
Right. And as well, kind of taking it into even more of like the sort of metaphysical perspective or the sort of spiritual perspective, that when you are more conscious of what you're doing all day every day, you're so much more present and so
Mm.
much more engaged. And it's that kind of the sort of Buddhist saying of like, before enlightenment chop and carry wood, and after enlightenment chop and carry wood. So the
Mm.
chopping and the carrying of wood
Yeah, love that.
becomes,
Yeah.
it's beautiful. It becomes a spiritual act in and of itself. So you start to see, again, you're not just sort of relegating movement to, I've got to go to the gym. And most of us, I'm assuming most of us were kind of treated it like I did too, where it was like I was very in my head when I would go to
Mm.
the gym. I was listening to music. I was not
Yes.
in my body whatsoever.
And waiting until it was done,
Yeah.
counting down the reps or the time, looking at the clock, how much have I got to go of this pain? And that's not joyful movement. And
It's not
movement
joyful.
can be, and exercise can be joyful. Absolutely.
Exactly. Exactly. And so when you're taking that perspective, you are just so much more in your life, and I think that's a really beautiful thing, and something that I think many of us are striving for, whether or not we're even conscious of that. We sense that something is missing in our lives. We sense that there's something more, and we're sort of seeking outside. But in many respects, it's just about reframing everything that you're already doing and seeing the most simple of things as a spiritual act.
And having the gratitude that your body can do that for you, not punishing yourself when there's things you can't do. We have a tendency to focus on the what we can't. And I love to put the word yet on the end, because I do believe everyone can progress. It doesn't matter to where, but I do believe progression is possible. And I think you're right about the sort of being within oneself, because the more that you can sense how your body feels before versus after some simple movements, the more you're allowing yourself to find the joy in that, feel good, and therefore want to repeat it. Quite frankly, your body will start to crave it. I now feel that my body and mind crave movement, and that can be not so great for the times that I can't move so well. And I do sit, of course. I sit. Everyone has to sit for long periods to do certain things. I have to work on a laptop a lot, doing my content writing, designing my classes, and so on. But as you may have seen on my Instagram, I'll do that sat on the floor. I use a standing desk down on the floor to make sure that I have to shift position regularly, because I'm in tune with what my body's asking me to do. It's asking me to shift. Whereas when you sit on a chair, things kind of just go to sleep and you don't get asked by your body to move. So then you forget to move. And then when you get up, you stand up and think, oh, why am I so stiff? It's because everything has molded to chair shape. We adapt to those patterns we use a lot. So that's why adding in these little variations can be so beneficial, because you're just so much more in tune with what your physiology is needing.
Absolutely. And I love too that so much of your focus is getting back in touch with the ground, because for me, that's not only quite a physical thing, but it's also a kind of metaphorical
Oh,
thing of,
yeah.
of grounding. When
Mm.
we get on the ground, we are grounding our energy, we are rooting ourselves. And many of us are actually afraid to get on the ground because we're afraid we can't get back up. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your experience with getting people on the ground.
Absolutely. I mean, what you're saying is probably one of the most common things that I work with clients on, that people reach out to me about. And when you talk about fear, that's absolutely the case. And unfortunately, that then overlaps into the fact that people then have the fear of falling as well, because they so rarely actually go through that height to get down fully to the ground. So it's an unusual experience for them. And therefore, when they fall, they're far more likely to tense up and more likely to be injured. Whereas when we're getting up and down to the floor regularly, which obviously, for example, I have to do because I'm working at ground level a lot. So just, the doorbell rings, I have to get up quickly and go and get the doorbell, etc. So I manage to incorporate that all the time in lots of different ways. But my clients struggle with the strength to do that. And also the mobility, particularly the joint mobility, because when we've been living at chair height, so our beds, our cars, our chairs, we don't tend to go below that unless we really need to. Then we start to lose that mobility in those lower body joints that we need to get down, and then the strength as well. So when we're lowering, we're using the muscles eccentrically, where they're sort of acting as brakes to help us slow down. And I think a lot of the fear comes from not having that strength, because we worry we're going to slam down. So I always say to start with furniture. People seem to think, oh, but that's cheating. It's not, it's enabling. It's enabling the fact that you're actually going to do the thing. And that's what we want. We want you to not avoid it. We want you to just try. And if you need to get up down one way and sort of shift around, use the furniture to get up another, great. Because each time you do that, if you have some consistency in doing that, you will find that you build strength and mobility to do that. So that's why I try and also list lots of different ways of doing it, because it's not just about always getting up and down the one way. It's trying to learn different patterns, because you will strengthen all different movements by having that variety. But I just saw your dog, having a dog is one of the best reasons to be able to keep doing that, because you need to be down at that level to see them and spending time there. So it's the best reason. You've also, if you're a little uncomfortable on the ground, you can always use cushions, blankets, whatever you need. Lean against something initially and try then to use your body to hold you upright after you're used to being more comfortable, finding out different positions to sit in so that you can shift from one position to another. And if you sort of feel pulled, then that means you need more cushions. So add more cushions until you feel a bit more relaxed. And then your body relaxes, your tissues adapt, because you're sort of telling that nervous system, it's okay. It's okay to be here. And then you can have a lovely time playing with your dog on the ground. And you'll probably be a little bit distracted if there is discomfort that you're not used to. That'll keep you down there for a little bit longer. But I always also I have a client who was always talking about her dog, and she now squats to wash the dog's paws after they've been on a muddy UK winter walk. Before she comes in. But she makes a point, when she does that, she always squats, and her heels aren't touching the ground yet. She feels that they're getting better, but she doesn't say that that's a barrier. It's not. This is my way of getting there, because I am washing the dog's paws anyway. So I love those things as well. Am I allowed to say that I've got a cat, or is that bad?
You are. Cats are welcome.
I'm a cat and dog. I know that people are a bit strange about that, but my cat has a litter tray, so I have to always squat to do the litter. It's creating these reasons and seeing that that's a benefit for them, for you, and for me, the ground. A lot of people are like, well, it's dirty. They come up with a lot of barriers, and I understand them all. But we can wash clothes, we can wash our hands. Doesn't matter about dirt. Dirt's good for us. Try to notice whether your barriers are your own barriers. Are they real barriers? And if they're just about strength and mobility, we can work on that. We can help with that. And then when we're older, having that goal of 20, 30 years plus, whatever age that you start with, then thinking, what do I want to be doing that time? Do I want to have a dog for the rest of my life? And therefore, if, whichever dog there is after this one and so on, my gran lived to 100, and she had a dog right up until just before she died. And she wanted to be able to look after the dog. She loved animals. It was her main driver. And isn't that the best thing? To be able to thinking about caring for someone else, but knowing you need to be getting down and practicing that daily so that you can. And I
Oh,
think those motivations are the most powerful.
they are. Those are brilliant examples. And I see quite a few people who are out on the dog walk, for example, and some of them are older. You can tell they're not really walking very properly. They've got some movement issues, and they've got these giant dogs that are pulling them along. And that that's not
Oh,
helpful for exactly. It's not helpful for either of them. And that particularly if something were to happen, the dog were to get off lead or what have you, they are not capable of actually catching up to that dog and helping to prevent any kind of issues that might arise from that. And I often see that, and I think that starts with getting on the floor with your dog and playing with your dog. Not only is it a great bonding experience,
mm,
your dogs, we need to be doing that with our dogs, getting down to their levels and engaging with them. But it's also preparing you for, exactly as you're saying, to be able to do that and care for them for years to
mm.
come. And it's so important to consider that now, not
Yeah,
when you've got a problem, not when you can no longer do it. Yes, of course, like you're saying, you can kind of work backwards and start to re-strengthen yourself, but why wait when you can just build it into how
why
you're
wait?
engaging your dog right now?
Yeah, and particularly because you're not having to add in lots of extra hard work to do. It just has to be consistent. It just has to be daily and done mindfully, because then we know that we are building as we go.
Yeah.
And I think we mentioned before when we were communicating, I remember when my dog, when I was growing up, got older, and I've seen it in other people. If you need to go on a walk, if you need to drive to that walk because you're not somewhere that's close to nature, often the dog can't get itself into the car. And people find themselves buying all manner of contraptions for them to walk up, and even then the dog finds that hard. So actually, if you have the strength in your body to be able to carry your dog, I mean, one of these big ones you're talking about, that really might be tricky. But if you do, and so for example, if you practice being able to carry your dog, then what better strength training? You're training for something you want to be doing. So it's hugely practical.
It is. It is. And I wanted to talk, since we're sort of bringing up the walks as well, about how
Mm,
actually walking your dog can be an opportunity to practice not only kind of strength training, but also moving our bodies differently on the walk. I know we chatted a little bit about how we could think about this, because you teach people how to do this when they're rambling, when they're walking
mm,
generally, but how taking our dogs out becomes a really prime opportunity for us to engage our bodies differently. And also, we can translate that to helping our dogs engage differently in
mm.
their own physiology.
Absolutely. And I think, just like getting down on the ground, they're going to get very excited because you're at their level all of a sudden. So they're going to absolutely love that. And it's the same when we're out. So part of during my recovery, understanding what natural movement was about, was looking at these people who were sort of Tarzan-esque, swinging through the trees, jumping off mad things, over bridges. That wasn't particularly relevant to me, but it did make me think, well, why am I not doing that? My boys are still wanting to do these types of things. Why is this exclusively for kids? So I started to, yeah, go out and sort of, well, I'm practicing balancing in my studio. I'm learning to put on my walking boots on one foot always, which is now a non-negotiable. I'm going to try to do that as best I can for life, so that I'm building my balancing practice into putting my walking boots on. But why can't I go and then do some practice in the woods and walking along, or even on the pavement edge? Because when we're walking with our feet in line, we're challenging our balance. It doesn't have to be, over on a bridge hanging over hundreds of feet down. It can just be a couple of inches up. It still feels a lot, and challenges the nervous system, really helps us with our balance as we age. And when part of the reason that we fall as we age is that our balance is less good. When we're walking, a lot of the proportion of that walking is actually on a single leg, a lot of the time spent. So we need to be nice and stable. We need to have a lovely stable gait pattern, and we need to be stable on each leg. So when we then over challenge the balance by doing things like spotting a tree trunk that's fallen, getting up, thinking, okay, it's not too far down, uh, it's not too slippy, whatever. I'm going to go and have a little wander. And it's so fun because, and you stop and, I teach people the techniques of balancing so that they are as upright as they can be. They're breathing nicely. I mean, balancing is a great example for mindful movement. You have to be very centered and present to do that because you are then calming yourself with your breathing so that you're relaxed in your upper body, but you've got lovely tension in the lower body to keep you in line and walking. So balancing, and once you start to think, oh, I want to have a little try, you start to spot opportunities around you where perhaps you might at first look around and think, is anyone watching? And then you start to not think, is anyone watching? You just think, I want to have a go. So it's that little sort of feeling of childishness inside us that's in us all. We don't lose that says, I want a little bit of an adventure. I also will hang on branches, and you can hanging's wonderful for the upper body. We spend a lot of our life with our shoulders rotated in, cooking, driving, typing, everything, because we need to see our hands doing things in front of us. And yet then that can cause us neck and shoulder pains and so on. So hanging is a great way of opening out the fronts of the shoulders, strengthening the shoulders to hold them back there. But you can hang off a branch without taking your feet off the ground. People are like, what do you mean hanging? But you can have a go. Try to take your feet off. Why not? But if that's too much, then hang with your toes on the ground, bend your knees so that you're taking some of the weight, but not all, and there's nowhere to fall, and just see how it feels through your body. So it's using nature or play frames or anything around you as apparatus to help you move. And I think that just brings fun. And believe me, you will have the dog very excited if you're up balancing on things, climbing over things, and even the simplest of things like stepping under things. We will often see something in our path and go around it because it's the easiest way. But instead, think, well, can I go under this? Even if I have to really get quite low and almost crawl, it's a really good idea to perhaps go side on and bend a hinge at the hips to then get a lovely hip movement with wide legs so that we're really rotating out in our hips. So think under, think forwards under, think side under, or climbing over. Why not? Why don't we have a little climb here and there if we're capable? So there's lots of thinking of just different ways, and seeing your environment differently can bring so much fun. And if you've got grandkids or kids, honestly, then the dog will be barking, the kids will be playing, and they'll think you're amazing for doing it because you're embracing play, and play is so good for the soul.
Absolutely. And it's a great way to engage with the environment, as you're saying, engage with your dog and engage with yourself. I mean, that's just so important. And I think even if you're not getting out into nature per se, but you're doing sort of the neighborhood walk where you're walking on the pavement or the sidewalk, and this is still possible to do. I do this with Lucky too, where I will, like you're saying, do this sort of inline walking along the edge, but also I'll kind of walk right at the edge and I'll put one foot down, like I kind of walk off the pavement, back on it,
Yep.
walk off, but sort of sideways more so than directly
Yes.
front. And he just thinks this is great because I've changed up what is kind
Yeah.
of normal, and he's having so much fun while we're doing it.
And I bet he can feel your energy. You naturally will smile a little bit, or you'll laugh at yourself, you'll breathe differently, and they can sense that you're in a good space with it. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
really worth it.
Absolutely. I also love walking backwards, and I'm not afraid of people looking at me and pointing. I mean, I walk Lucky. He's a little just under 10 pounds, 4.3 kilo Chihuahua, and I walk him on a 30-foot lead. And so people and people already look at me, and I was like, all right, we're going full on weird. Embrace the weird.
Oh, exactly. I always say that to my boys, embrace your inner weirdo. It's so important. That's what makes us unique.
Exactly, exactly. And it makes it fun, and I agree with you that once you start walking in this way or just engaging with your environment in this way, you start seeking out other opportunities to do it, and you notice other opportunities that you might not have noticed before, and it just becomes a lot more fun.
And you can just set yourself some little challenges as well. If there's something that you think, oh, not sure about that, but you know where it is and you're going to come back on that same loop again, then you might try. I mean, I honestly, I've even talking about urban spaces. Yeah, I'm afraid I have been up climbing on benches because why not? They're sturdy. I think it's social norms, and some people would see it as disrespecting, but we'll let kids jump over. Why can't we? And we have some stones that a neighbor has put out sort of along the front outside of their property, but they're all painted and they're sort of rugged. So I'll jump from one to another, or I'll step up and step down. I'll just, rather than going round. We always
Mhm.
go round. We naturally, as humans, we take the easy path. We want to be comfortable. It's in our genetics to do that. We shouldn't blame ourselves for that. We were brought into this world to procreate. That makes it a bit simple, and feed ourselves until we go. And therefore, our physiology is such that if we expend too much energy, then survival is harder. So actually, when when we're pushing ourselves to move more and exercise, it is a push. We do have to counteract that physiology because our innate drive is to conserve energy. So finding these opportunities that actually bring you joy as well, that
Mhm.
link makes it all the better. And I was just thinking,
Yeah.
sorry, I just thought of another thing. Out on walks, obviously throwing and catching balls is brilliant. It's something you're probably more likely to do anyway if you've got a dog that likes that. But often we will sort of outsource it to one of those throwing things because it goes a bit further and the dog goes a bit further and so on. But try to not always use that. Try to really work on your throw and try to mix it up. Use both hands so that you're using both sides rather than always using your dominant side. Things like that are great, or frisbees, a different angle, but throwing is brilliant for us to get stronger in our upper body and our shoulders particularly. So it's seeing these things not just for the dog but also for us.
Yes, absolutely. I love that you bring up kind of getting away from our tendency to just use our dominant side, because one of the things that I noticed too when I was sort of when I'd get down on the ground with Lucky, I noticed I was always getting up on the same side. And I
Yeah.
suddenly thought, okay, well, what if I shifted that? And so I got up on the other side. I was like, whoa, is that side weaker? Just because I've
Wow.
favored one side. So now I will intentionally, as I'm going to go get up, the default is, put my right leg up. And I'm like, nope,
Well,
nope, put the left
good
leg
for
up and
you.
and work on that. Or even
That's so
coming up the
it's so true.
stairs, coming up
Yes,
the
we
stairs,
all
doing it opposite.
dominate. Yeah, we all dominate. And going back to the balancing, we will go straight to our leg that's easier. The one that we feel more stable, we'll immediately go to that again because the body feels safer. It will take less energy to be on that side and so on. So it's good to always remember if balance is a thing you're not so sure about, which is my good leg? Okay, I'm going to start on my less good leg. As you say, switching it up, just reframing. But by saying that, you were noticing your own patterns. And it's that awareness, that being really in touch with, okay, I'm doing this to myself. This is a choice I'm making, not consciously, but subconsciously. And I can undo that is brilliant because then you just start to notice so much about the way you move.
You
So
do. You do.
it's a perfect example.
And not only how you move, but how you then condition yourself to engage with your world generally. Like I was, when I was coaching women who were sort of struggling with the ideas of purpose, one of the things that I would do was give them this little assignment to shake up the way that they were seeing themselves in their world. And it was to take a bit of an adventure day. And it's a little bit like when you're walking your dog that you give them the opportunity for like a sniffari, where you allow them just to sniff and go wherever they want to go, that you're not going specifically from
Sniffer.
it's I know it's a great term.
Great.
But we tend to, like when we're on the dog walk, for example, especially if you're rushed, if you're doing it before
Mm.
work or what have you, you're like, we've got 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. We've got to go and get this stuff done. But if you can take the opportunity to give yourself and your dog a little bit of time and space and allow them, if they want to sniff one thing for 5 minutes, you allow them to sniff one thing for 5 minutes. And then they might like jet over here and you allow them to jet over here. And what that does is it reframes the patternings at a kind of physical level. But also, I've noticed for myself when I'm in those stress states that this anxiety will come up of like, oh my God, but we're supposed to be doing this and da 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 da
Yeah.
da. And it gives me a chance to reframe like, is that actually true? And one of the exercises I would give my clients was to have a similar kind of day just for yourself where you challenge all of your norms. So like if you normally start with like if you normally get out of bed on the right side, get out of bed on the left side and it will feel
Love it.
really weird at first. You're like, "Oh," but you start to see like it changes your perspective because exactly like you mentioned you become much more aware and focused versus running off of just habit. And then if you normally put on your left shoe first, put your right shoe on first. And just these small little things. If you normally turn right when you leave your door, try turning left. And
Yeah.
it will shake everything up so you become much more aware of yourself, of your body, how you're holding yourself, of your environment, and you're not running on autopilot, which I think so many of us in the modern world are running on autopilot with every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And because we are rushed, there's so much communication coming at us all the time. The to-do list is endless. Absolutely. It's very, very hard not to. But from my perspective, when you then are not intentional and are not aware, things can happen just around the corner that you didn't expect that can completely change what you believe is your future. And that's a scary place to be. And you want to be able to be, as I say, back to the gratitude that I have if we're talking about movement, particularly, I have the ability to move and move with my dog in this way. And yes, I need to rush and get this 20-minute walk done. But even if I have just balanced to put my shoes on, walked beautifully the whole time and not balanced on anything or whatever, but I've perhaps noticed something in my environment. Even if it's a small flower and focused on that little thing that it has taken me out of it. And I felt grateful that I'm able to do this walk. I have a lovely dog and it's, a beautiful or even a horrible in the UK most of the time at the moment with the grey skies day. I'm walking constantly under low grey skies on mud. But that's a great example too. Mud's a difficult thing to walk on. Your legs are skating. But then I reframe that as, yeah, I'm getting a great skating alternative movement. So yes, it's annoying, but at the same time, it's also an opportunity. And as you say, shifting these things, it just makes life easier, better, lighter, more joyful. And I think as well from a physical perspective, I'm very I believe strongly that the mind and body are literally one thing. And I think when I was injured, I would say about 2 years in, I realized that unless I dealt with the frustration and anger I was holding about my situation with my body, because I didn't believe this was how it was going to be for my body, until I got to that point of acceptance, um, and a bit more self-compassion, until I got to that point, nothing really was changing significantly. But after that, it did. And so I think if we can feel that sort of lightness and a bit more joy and channeling our joy, I think you have to find joy and work on it. I think once you do, your body will also repay you. You're likely to be in less pain and less stiff and so on, because it's working in a lovely cycle
Oh, I love
between the
that.
brain and the body.
I love that so much. That's so important. I'm glad you brought that up because it's also the thing where, especially other traditions are perhaps more cognizant of this than we are, but that pain is messages, like it's information from your body that something is going on. And it's often that we have stuck energy. You might hear it referred to as chi or prana or what have you, but that there's something that's not moving properly, both at a very physical level, but also at an energetic level. And the physical is just there to show us and remind us so that we bring awareness to that. And that includes holding on to emotions.
Yes.
Especially as women, we tend to hold emotions in our hip areas. So a lot of
Mm.
women have stiff hips. And it's not just because we're sitting all day. That's a big part of it, but it's also
Mm.
because we don't necessarily consciously work on addressing our emotions and we stack them there. And so when you become both aware of physical movements that you can be doing and you're bringing awareness to your emotions and your energy flow, that's like the golden ticket for
Yeah,
getting back into alignment with yourself.
I fully agree. Yeah, and that was part of the work I had to do. And yeah, I went to see someone who really helped me work with my energy, and it was, yeah, it was called illumination, and it really was illumination. It certainly helped me relieve, um, and just see myself. I was more able to see myself, and reflect back what was really happening and be very honest with myself. And I think until that point, I hadn't been. I'd been the victim and I was pushing hard against. And that's fair. That's the position a lot of people are in, but I'm just very grateful that I managed to turn that around.
Oh, that's wonderful. And, relating it back to our dogs as well, that our dogs pick up on our energies. So when we are holding on to emotions, when we're stressed, they feel it and they take it on too. And you might even see that they start to exhibit different physical issues themselves as a result of it. So you dealing with your own emotions and your own physicality, and then also getting your dog out to walk in really fun and playful and interesting ways with you is a healing for both of you, which I think is just beautiful.
And I actually, to extend it further than the family pet, is also my children. If I, and maybe that is being the female in the house, dominated by males, but when I'm not right, then they act differently. They can really sense it. Everyone senses it. We all, when we live in a space together, yeah, it's all ping-ponging off, and we have to be aware of that. Wish they were a little bit more aware towards me sometimes.
You're teaching them, they'll get there.
I'm teaching them. That's it, exactly.
You have to model it first. There you go.
That's right. That's right. Starting with movement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wendy, you've given us some great tips already, but I wondered if there's anything specific that you might suggest that people start with today to start getting in touch with their bodies through natural movement.
I think probably we've covered most of it. We talked about the fact that varied terrain was important. So I think when you are out on a walk, searching for varied terrain is really, really good for the body. It's brilliant for the feet, the ankles, the knees, and the hips. And obviously, everything in our body is connected. We don't work on in natural movement. We work in whole body movement patterns because everything is integrated. That is the way that we move. So looking for varied terrain. And the other thing I was going to talk about was walking technique. So often people don't really think about how they walk. And it's a simple couple of little twists we can do to really help us. So the first thing is about being upright, which sounds a bit strange, but often when people wear shoes with heels, and trainers even are higher at the back than they are at the front. So I choose to wear barefoot shoes or minimal footwear all the time now, because that has really helped me to feel better. And that's something that I have written a blog about. So people could find that on my website if they have are intrigue or interest. But the main thing is that when we have a little bit of a heel in our shoe, we're already making our body lean forward slightly. And therefore, we're having to strain through the back of our body to hold ourselves upright. So that's already putting the back line of the body under tension so that we're not going to fall, because we want to be in line with gravity so that we're having to make the least effort through our musculature to keep us up. If we can try and right ourselves as we're walking, I've got lots of videos on YouTube about alignment, so please feel free to go and have a look at them. And I've got a few about walking as well. But being upright, it seems counterintuitive, but what it does to us is that then we are, rather than leaning forward and closing our hips, the angle in our hips, which is what we do when we're sitting. So we don't want to be doing so much of that. By being more upright, we're opening out that angle. If we then add on the tip two, one of two, is that if we think about when we're walking, pushing off with our back foot, So instead of walking and feeling like you're pulling the ground towards you, but instead pushing off with the back foot, if we're nice and upright, we're then opening out our hip because our leg's going right behind us. So we open out the front of the hip nicely, which gets ever so tight from sitting. But at the same time, we're firing our glute in the back, in our rear, which we really need for stability, for everything. It's a really important muscle. So as you push off, the glute fires and that front of hip flexor opens. And what's amazing is you actually walk faster. So you kind of think that if you're on a lean intuitively, you're good because you're kind of toppling to go with gravity, you're going faster. Actually, you can't swing your leg fully. When you're upright, you can. And therefore, pushing off, so just think upright and think pushing off with the back foot, and just give it a try. Push off and really do it, sort of overdo it the first few times to sort of see how it feels, and then go back to normal and notice the difference. But if you do that, you can actually walk faster and you are more upright, and therefore you're less likely to fall because you've got the ability to pull your leg up. You're less likely to trip on things because your foot is more likely to clear the ground. Whereas when you're leaning down towards it, it's going to catch on things. So that's my two top tips for walking technique that obviously you can do every single time you walk, and not even just when you're walking the dog, but when you're walking around the house, anything at all. So that's a really practical one for dog walking and walking in general that can be really
Oh, great.
helpful.
Oh, that's so great. I was just imagining a bunch of us listening to this podcast now, all trying that at once. I love it. I love it.
Well, and actually, if I can add to it, if you think
Please.
of a Venetian gondolier, so you've got the gondola is the boat, and you've got the guy at the back with the massive pole, and he's pushing the boat forward. If you imagine that your body is the boat and the pole is your leg behind you, you're pushing your body forward, that boat forward. So we can all pretend to be gondoliers. And where I'm from in Oxford, we've got little canals where you can do something called punting, which is very much like the Venetian gondoliers, but much smaller version. So I will say it punting or being that Venetian gondolier. So try it and maybe look at my video and I might be explaining it better on that.
I love it. That's so helpful. And I love just that simple reframe because I even had an experience when I was learning how to kayak. And the person who was teaching me was absolutely brilliant. And he was in a kayak beside me. And he noticed that I was pulling, like you're saying, that we tend to pull with our feet. I was pulling with my arms. And he said, switch to actually pushing with the rear one. So instead of like trying to do it this way, you're flipping the focus. And not only did it make it a heck of a lot easier to do, but also I felt in my body much stronger. I felt
Yeah,
more in line because I wasn't demanding something of a group of muscles that weren't really designed to
yeah,
do that very well. It just like everything sort of like a domino effect, right? It was like a click, 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 click sort of feeling that I felt much more better and strong to be able to do the activity as a result of simple
yeah,
reframe.
yeah,
Simple reframe.
absolutely.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, and
Wendy,
actually, that this is the thing. I think some people are well. So, sorry, go on.
no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, technique is everything, and I think that when you asked before about getting up and down to the ground and so on, there are different techniques and there are useful ways of doing things that can mean something doesn't seem available to you, and then when you learn a very slightly different way to do it, suddenly it is. And that's purely through technique, not through your general capability. It's just by thinking about things differently in the way you move and in other ways. So learning about technique is important.
Definitely. No, I was just going to say that you've got a whole host of resources on your YouTube channel and your Instagram account, which I'll leave links for so people can check that out. But what are
Thank
some
you.
other ways that people can work with you? Because I know you do a variety of different like courses, etc. How, if somebody wants to take this a bit further and work more specifically, what would that look like for them?
So I mainly coach classes now in my membership. So I have a membership which has a library of all my old classes. And I do live on a Wednesday, first thing in the morning in the UK, and at lunchtime, so that it's also open to people in the US. So the lunchtime here, early morning over there. And in that, there's also a whole section on mini moves, because I'm very passionate about 5-minute blocks of movement. So not only are there little tutorials on the types of movements you can use, but also there's lots of little videos that you can play along. You think, I just need to move a bit, but I can't think how. And you just follow a 5-minute. And for me, the library is as much about the classes live and replay as it is about those mini movement breaks, because each of them brings a healthy little different thing that you probably might not have done otherwise. So that's on a monthly membership. I also do 5-day courses a few times a year, where I sort of introduce the different movements of natural movement. And I've also now got a podcast. Nearly forgot about the podcast. And that podcast is all about inspiring people to move more and better by listening to specialists, but also listening about other people's experiences where movement has changed a lot in their life, like it has for me.
Wendy, this has just been so much fun. You are just a wealth of knowledge and an absolute joy. There are so many great nuggets that I know people are going to be able to take away and start using today, not only to benefit themselves, but also to connect more deeply with their dogs and make the walk a really fun experience for both of you.
I've really enjoyed it, and as you know, I haven't got a dog at the moment. I've had them growing up, but I love dogs, and I sort of see myself as the lucky one that I don't have to have a dog to get me out, because I love walking anyway. But I think dogs are just the best thing. My parents actually are. My dad's about to turn 80, and they recently got a dog. They got a 4-year-old dog who had had a couple of litters of pups. She's sort of slightly a rescue, and she has just brought so much joy to them and is getting them out walking. And so it's just such a great thing. So I love dogs, but I'm really pleased to be on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for joining us. And I wanted to ask you one last question that I ask all of my guests. And that is, what have dogs, whether that's dogs that you've had as a child or even your parents' dogs or sort of generally, what have they taught you about what it means to be human?
I would start, I suppose, with the more emotional side, being that love is absolutely unconditional. And pets really show you what that is, because they bring you. I have a cat, and I wanted my children to experience an animal in the home, to understand about that deeper connection that you can have with a non-human. And it reminded me so much of that hugely unconditional love that is so much more than you ever expect it to be. And seeing the relationships of those around you with that animal is just such a wonderful, wonderful experience. But I also have to say, they also make you realize that it's fun to move, because they love moving. So I couldn't not say that as well. And we should learn from our children the way they move, but we should also learn from our pets and our animals about just being happy to bound around and have fun, and love moving and love walking. So I think there's two parts to it.
Oh, I love that. Just the sheer joy of being in the body. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, I
yeah,
love it.
totally.
Oh, that was such a great answer. Thank you for sharing. Wendy,
Thank
it
you.
has been such a joy. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to hear what people think of this and what they start to try for themselves. So, if you do take some of Wendy's tips and move them forward into your life, get in touch with both of us and let us know what you
Yes,
think, what you found useful, and also
absolutely.
what other things maybe you've come up with that we didn't talk about today that you found.
Yes.
That would be really
Yeah.
fun. All
It's been
right.
really lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode with Wendy Welpton. I hope you've come away with some ideas on how you can practice new, natural ways of moving with your pup. As she mentioned in our conversation, Wendy has loads of great videos and free resources so that you can start to see some of these movement ideas in action. You can find many of them on her Instagram account, which is at reclaim.movement, as well as her YouTube channel. I've left these links in the show notes. To learn more about Wendy's online membership, as well as her online and in-person private coaching sessions in Oxford in the UK, please visit her website, reclaimmovement.co.uk. Again, I've left the link in the show notes. Also, be sure to check out Wendy's new podcast, Make Movement Matter, which you can find on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you would consider liking, subscribing, rating, and reviewing the podcast. It really helps so much and makes it easier for other Mystic Dog Mamas and Papas to find the podcast. And let me know what other topics you'd like me to cover or guests that you'd like me to invite onto future episodes. I'm all ears. You can message me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. Okay, until next time.